Hi, everyone. Today, what I want to talk about, um, is David, King David. And I chose to talk about him for a bunch of reasons. And same too with Abraham, like you could really do a whole thing just on them and their lives. And when I was preparing, I was like taking it a bunch of different directions of, because, there's really so much to say. So I tried to narrow it down again. Um, I actually, a little tidbit, I used to teach middle school Tanakh, and I taught Sefer Shmuel for a few years. And David is really one of my top favorite people in Tanakh for many, many reasons. I just feel like he's so dynamic and so much to learn from. And I hope that I could give that to you a little bit today. So what I want to do is give a bit of a background about David, a little context of him, and then speak about two, maybe three, we'll see how timing goes, specific instances about his life. So to start, David, just basic, I'm sure many of you know this, but just giving a background. David was the second king of Israel. He was the first king from Shevet Yehuda, from the tribe of Yehuda. The first king was Shaul, who was from the tribe of Binyamin, and I'm saying the tribes is important, which we'll talk about soon. Shaul failed as king, and hence David was chosen. Shaul is also a very, very interesting character to study, but we're not doing that tonight. And David, basically, his whole life is in one way or another defined by instability. And even though he's a king and he establishes the monarchy of Israel, he really does not have a calm life at all. He has a really unstable, stressful, very intense life that he deals with. And just to highlight a few of those things. So, like I said, he's the second king of Israel. And when he becomes king, Shaul is still king. Shaul sins, and God tells him, "You're not going to have your lineage. I'm choosing someone else." He chooses David during Shaul's lifetime, but secretly. And Shaul is living his whole life in paranoia and in stress that if he gets David, then maybe he could continue being king. He has that delusion. So a lot of David. A lot of the story of David is him running away from Shaul, sometimes in Israel, in Eretz Yisrael itself, sometimes out of Eretz Yisrael, under foreign rulers. We'll talk about that also. But he's always on the run. There's no sense of safety for him. And then even when Shaul dies, and he doesn't have that threat anymore. He has the threat of Shaul's family, and the nation is divided, and they don't fully accept him yet. And even when they fully accept him, they fully accept David, and he rules over all of the nation, all the tribes. He then has a civil war to worry about, and then he has the rebellion of his son to worry about, and he has all these stressors in his life. A big part of his life is capturing the land around him. The land in Eretz Yisrael, and around that weren't fully finished being captured during the time of Yoshua. So he's dealing with all that, and he's basically, we see, in retrospect, looking back, he's setting the stage for the stability of his son Shlomo, and which we'll see why that's important. Sorry, I just shut the computer. So basically, what happens is, and I spoke a lot about the fact that he doesn't have this calm in his lifetime of, I am king, I have my people, things are okay. No, he's always on the run. He's always worried about, looking over his shoulder for Shaul, for rebellion, for all those things. His own personal life with his children was a big mess. So there was just a lot of things that were not stable in David's life. But when he does get to a moment of calm, a moment of stability, it's very interesting to see what he chooses to do. So before I go into that, actually, I want to just talk about a side thing that's going to come in, is we learn about David's life from three places in the Tanakh, basically. One of them, the main one being Sefer Shmuel in the Nevi'im, the book of Samuel. We learn about a majority of his life. We also learn from Divrei Hayamim, which is Chronicles in the end of the Tanakh, and we also learn about it through his writings in Sefer Tehillim. So with those three sources, most of what we're going to be talking about tonight is in Sefer Shmuel, but we're also going to talk about Divrei Hayamim as well. And a little context about this is it's very interesting to see the different, there's retellings or different tellings of the same story in Shmuel and in Divrei Hayamim. And from those two perspectives, we learn different things, and it completes different things. So it's something to be conscious of when you're reading any work, when you're reading anything, to be aware and critical, whether it be a religious work or from the Tanakh, or whether it be a novel even, or anything, a history book, or even a novel, a fiction, nonfiction, whatever it is, it's written with an agenda, right? And whatever that agenda may be. And you have to have that in the back of your mind, a little bit of what the agenda is. So I'm giving this whole background to give more of a context of what of the story and how it's all going to connect, but just so bear with me a second. But basically, the book of Shmuel is written with the context in mind of showing the reader, us, of how the malchut, the kingship, the leadership of Israel was developed. Specifically, the family of David, of Yehuda, of Sheba Yehuda, the family of David's leadership. That's really the underlying goal of Sefer Shmuel. The goal of Divrei Hayamim is more of a chronology of our history and of different events in our timeline, and it's more of a general overall context of the nation, as opposed to the king's family per se, and the rulers per se. So that's just something to keep in mind, which we'll touch on in a little bit again when we talk about the differences in the stories. And I like to sort of look at it, it's a little bit of a crude analogy, but I like to sort of look at it if something happens to you and you call your sister to tell her, and you tell the story, and then your friend calls you and you tell her the same story, but there's, just by nature of who the people are, or when they caught you, or what your agenda of the story is, you're going to leave out certain details or add certain details to one or the other. So similar type of idea here with Divrei Hayamim and Shmuel. So that whole little introduction is going to connect to what we're talking about now. So like I said, what happens? David's living this life of unrest, right? He's running from Shaul. He's not secure. He has rebellions. He has civil wars, and he's at a point now, which the story I'm gonna zone in on now, is where the Aron Hashem, the ark, right, was not in the hands of the leadership for many years. And David now sees that there's security. He captured a lot of the enemies. He's establishing himself in Jerusalem, in Ir David, and he tells them to bring the Aron to Ir David and to have it in the centralized area of the monarchy. They bring it up. It's a whole thing. Also a very interesting story. It doesn't go well at first, and it does go well. And now it's in Yerushalayim, and it's in Ir David, and he goes to Natan Hanavi, who's the prophet at the time. Well, there's a few, we're going to talk about a few, but Natan is one of the prophets at the time. And he says, we're sitting here secure. I have my palace, my city. I want to build a house for God, for, the Aron Hashem, for God, to worship God. I want to build him. He says, a Bet Arazim. Hold on, let me share my screen with you. I put up some sources so you could see and not just listen to me. Here you go. Okay, so I titled this class David, a King Without a Castle. I was back and forth about it, but I don't know, that's where I got for now. Hold on, let me move this so I could, why is this not moving? Okay, one second, sorry, bear with me. Okay, yeah, so hold on. Here, so Vayhi ki yashav hamelech b'beto v'Adonai niach lo mesaviv mikol oivav, right? So he's sitting in his castle, and God has made him secure from his enemies. He Omer hamelech, someone's not on mute. Someone who's on is not on mute. Sorry. How do I do that? No, I don't know. Anyway, thank you for muting. Okay, so he Vayomer HaMelech El Natan Hanavi Re'eh na anochi yoshev bebet arazim v'Aron Elohim yoshev betoch hayiriyah. So he says, I'm sitting in this beautiful arazim, is like is a tree. It's like I'm sitting in this strong structured house, and Aron Elohim is Yoshev Betoch HaYariyah. It's sitting in tent poles, right? And so he wants to make the house for God, the Beit HaMikdash, essentially. And why is he asking specifically now? There's a halacha. I brought the Rambam here. But other sources, I mean, it's cited other places as well. The Rambam says, and other sources as well again, but there's Shloshah mitzvot nitztavu Yisrael b'sha'ak nisatan la'aretz. There's 3 things that Bnei Yisrael needs to do when they get into the land. Leminot lahem melech, to establish themselves a king. Shene'emad som tasim alech hamelech, that you should put upon yourself a king. Ulachrit zaro shel Amalek, to destroy Amalek. Shene'emad timchet zecher Amalek, to erase the memory of Amalek. Ulemnot bet habechira, and to build the house, the chosen house, right? Beit HaMikdash. L'shechno tidreshu ubata shama, so that you could go worship and connect to God there. So we see that in David's time, at this point in his life, the 2 of them have been done. What happened? Like I said, it didn't start out so easy with David. He was actually anointed king 3 times. Once in secret in his father's house, only his family knew. Once by the people of Hebron in his own shevet, the tribe of Yehudah. Again, at this time, it's right after the Shoftim, and the nation is still very tribal. So his tribe was on his side, but the rest wasn't. So he was king in Hebron. And then finally, the source here on the screen, Vayavo kol shtei Yisrael David Hebrona vayamru lemor hinenu atzmenu basenu anachnu. You're part of us. And skip over, because it talks about also in the time of in David. I didn't go into all this, but in the time of David running from Shaul, there was a lot of people that helped him and then didn't help him. So there was this like, whose side are you on type of feeling. So they're saying, no, we were always on your side. You're one of us. Yes and no. And then Vayvo kol zegnei Yisrael melech Hebrona vayichlot lahem hamelech David brit bechebron lefnei Hashem vayimshechu et David lamelech Yisrael. And now at this point, he is anointed king over all of Israel. So now these 2 things are done, right? There is malchut, there is leadership, there is a king, and and now David, sorry, and then also before this, David destroys Amalek. Here it says, "Vayibdehu v'hine netushim al pnei kol haaretz ochlim v'shotim." Amalek is all having a party, v'chol rigim, v'chol hashalal, and they're all haughty. And then skip over to the middle. Vayakim David man neshef al ha'erev. David destroys all of them. V'lo nimla mihem ish, and no one could run away. Ki'im advei me'ot ish na'ar asher rachbu al gonim. A few people ran away, but he got them. And vayitzel David kol asher lakhu Amalek, and David saved the people that Amalek captured. So we see that now he established himself. He did the 2 things. I'm going to stop. He did the 2 things that he had to do before the Beit HaMikdash. So now he's speaking to Natan HaNavi, and he's saying, okay, he doesn't say this explicitly, but we, as the readers knowing this background, feel like he's ready and secure. And it's interesting also, by the way, that when he is secure, he doesn't choose to make himself stronger and beautify his own palace. He chooses to build the bayit for Hashem, the house for God. Okay, so now what happens? We have a nevuah that night, a prophecy that Natan HaNavi gets, which essentially says, David, you can't build the Mikdash, but your son will. And the reason I brought the whole Divrei Yamim situation in the explanation in the beginning was because we're going to see 2 explanations in Divrei Yamim and in Shmuel of why he can't build the Mikdash. So, and it's very interesting to see the perspectives on that. So what happens? He in Shmuel, hold on, where is it? No, here. Alaylahu vayhi devar Elohim el Natan lemod, and Natan gets a nevuah that night. So David asks for permission. Natan says sure, but then he gets a nevuah that night. And it says, God tells him, Lech v'amarta el David abdi, ko amar Hashem, lo ata tibnei li habayit l'Hashem. You're not going to be the one to build me my house. Ki lo yoshavti b'bayit min hayom asher haliti et Yisrael ad hayom hazeh. The reason being is that I never had a house. I took Yisrael out of Mitzrayim. I never had a house. I had the Mishkan. It was temporary. It was able to be opened, built and taken apart. It was like a tent structure. And b'chol asher talachti b'chol Yisrael hadaber dibarti et echad shoftei Yisrael asher tiviti And God's sort of saying, like, did I ever ask of any of the former leaders to build a Bet Arazim? Like, I know this is not what I asked for. It's not needed right now. Fast forward though to Yud Aleph, and this is continuing of the Nevuah. But when you go to your fathers, meaning when you pass away, when you die, when you die, don't worry, your son from your zera, from your lineage, will be king. And you will and his chair will be secure forever, meaning the lineage will be passed down forever. Right? Meaning we'll have this connection of father and son, and I'll never leave him. And then Natan the next morning goes to tell David. So now, before I jump into the other perspective from Divrei Yamim, I want to focus on this for a minute. So what's happening here, essentially? What's happening here, essentially, is God is telling David through Natan that I don't want the house now. He says no explicit reason why. He just says this is not needed right now. And he says, he makes a brit with him almost, right? Not almost, he makes a brit with him that your child, your son will be the next leader. It'll be passed through lineage. And this is something that David needs to hear, because with Shaul, that didn't happen. Because he's looking at the past king Shaul, and he could be thinking, well, Shaul was king and it wasn't passed down. I ended up becoming king. God chose me instead. So who's to say that God's not going to choose someone else after me that's not from my heir? So God's saying, no, I will choose your zera. Is going to be the king after you. And he's going to build the house for me. He's going to establish this. So I want to look at this almost as the same way Brit Ben HaBetarim with Abraham was a promise to God from God to Abraham of starting the nation, right? And he's saying your children, you'll have children, first of all, which is something that Abraham didn't know he was going to have because he was barren at the time, and your children will get the land. But God says they'll be strangers, and it's not happening right now, right? And we spoke about that a lot last time. I'm not going to go into that, but that idea of a promise that's not going to be actualized right now, it's a promise of land and a promise of children. So and that was on a nationalistic level. I want to say that was to Abraham the father of the nation, and this promise to David as the father of the malchut, of the kingship, is a specific brit, saying, I will give it to your child. It'll be passed down through air, through DNA, through your children. And not only that, he's not getting the land now, but he's saying you'll establish the Beit HaMikdash, which in a sense is the goal of having Eretz Yisrael, is having the monarchy and political freedom and religious freedom to worship and connect to God how we want, to help us actualize ourselves. So God is making, in my opinion, a more specified brit with David that happened, so to speak, with Abraham. And the same way, by the way, just interesting to note, the same way we use Abraham as our lifeline of connection to God, and we always mention him in our tefillah, that Abraham, where I would say that God, that he's the God of Abraham, and we use that connection, that even though I messed up, I'm still a child of Abraham. We see later in Sefer Melachim, also interesting book to learn, that even when the monarchy was split and there was divisions, it always says repeatedly that God left the tribes of Yehuda and Benjamin and also part of Shimon that were always under king from David's family because of this brit that he made with David. So no matter how bad they got, they always had part of the monarchy. And interestingly enough, when they go into Galut, that's the only one that ends up staying somewhat together. And Mashiach supposed to be coming from David's family as well. So it's all of that connection that the same way God will never forsake the Jewish people as a nation because of Abraham, he's never going to forsake the family of David as kings. So we see this as a very almost benign answer from God, like, I just don't need it right now. And then then David, I'll skip that for a second. David responds to this as anyone who learned anything about David could imagine, is to pray, right? He has a prayer of thanks to God, and he says, he's so thankful. He says, you basically you brought me up out of nothing, and now I'm a king, and I wasn't worthy of this, and not only did you do this with me, but you're going to continue it on to my family, right? And not only that, he also talks about the nation, right? Like, because he's the king, he's not only a personal, individual person, he's also a national person. So his prayer of thanks is not only for himself and his family and his brit that God made with him, but it's also for the nation, and how, and here he says here, again, like we said, you're always going to be connected to the nation and to your nation, and never forsake your nation, never forsake me. And he's very thankful for this. Now let's look at this, what happened in the Yamim. So in the Yamim, we see this. We are told the story when David is telling Shlomo, his son, before David's almost at his death, and he's passing on information to Shlomo. And it says, David Shlomo beni nar verach v'abay livnot l'Hashem lagdil lemala l'Hashem utferet. You're my son. You need to be the one to build the house for God. And he says, David Shlomo, I had it in my desire, in my heart, was to build the house for God. And God told me, you spilled too much blood, you had too much wars, you cannot be the one to build the house. You need You'll have a son, a man of calm, of rest, of peace, and he'll have a time of peace. David's whole life is wars, is establishing the monarchy, and Shlomo and Shlomo is going to be the one who's going to have quiet and peace in his life, and he's going to build the house. And I'll be like his father, and he'll have the seat of the kingship forever. So here we see another reason that God tells him, you're a man of war, and I need a man of peace to build this house. So it's a very interesting perspective as well, because we see that in Sefer Shmuel, when they're talking about building, the goal of talking about building of the monarchy, they don't want us to look at the fact that he was waging all these wars and establishing the borders of Israel and strengthening the Israel from its enemies as something negative, that's the reason he can't build the house, because that whole side of David was so important to building the monarchy. And here in the Yamim, when it's more of a chronology, then we could talk about the fact that David was a man of war, and we need a man of peace to be building the house of God, to build the Beit HaMikdash. So just interesting to note that duality. So now what I want to talk about is the fact that even though and also the Malchut adds stability to a nation, right? We know that a nation without proper leadership is a mess, right? And the thing is that David's whole goal in his life was to establish that, and he passes that on to his son. We see that Shlomo does not fight many wars. He does more politics and treaties and things like that, but he doesn't necessarily fight so many wars. He does fight wars, but not anywhere near what David had to deal with. And we see something very interesting about David is that just because he is told that he can't build it, it does not mean he will not have a part of it and not make that his life's work. And we see what he does is every war he fights, everything he does, he starts this treasury for God, which, I don't know if I brought that here 1 second. Yes, I did. Hold on, let me show you. He basically, in the same passage, when he's telling his Shlomo about building the Mikdash, he also says, I set up I have all these storehouses of, here, I'll show you on the bottom here. Hachinoti lebet Hashem zahav, kikarim, Mea elef bekesef elef alafim kikarim, right? He has all this gold and silver and bronze and etzim, avanim, right? And trees and avanim meaning precious stones, right? All this, the alehem tosif. So he said, I established all this treasury for you, and you'll be adding to it. But he basically spent his whole life preparing and getting ready for that stability for the Mikdash. And in the most essential ways, we can skip over a little bit, he buys the land, the plot of land where the Mikdash is going to be built. And that's a very, very interesting story. We're going to jump to that now because I want to talk about the fact that the king is not only worried about the physical land, he also has to worry about building God's house, because that's one of the goals of the king, is to be a political and establish religious sovereignty, right? Political and religious sovereignty. There is a separation of church and state in Judaism, of the malchut and the kehuna, right? The priest and the king. There is that separation, but that doesn't mean that the king is void of that religious side. It is actually a mitzvah, a command. The king is commanded to write a Sefer Torah and put that in his perspective of how he's ruling the nation as a conduit of God, right? He's not his own person. He's ruling the nation through God's laws. So even though there is the Kohanim and the king, there's also that important level of the king. So he's always focused on that, David especially. So now we fast forward, and it's a very interesting story. I'm not going to go into the whole story. I'm going to focus more on the purchasing. Now, basically what happens is at the end of David's life, almost at the end, he decides to do a census of the people. And very interesting story. It's actually told that God manipulated this and what happened, and it was a sin, and why was it a sin? A whole other story, very interesting. But the thing I want to focus on is more of the what that leads to. So what happens is he counts the nation and he does a census of the nation. And why is this such a big deal? Part of it is because in the says we should never count people. We should only count it through a shekel kesef, through a coin, and it could bring on destruction. It could bring on a plague, and it's not something you should do. And especially, it's not something you should do without a purpose. And there's two reasons here that they say it wasn't ideal to be done at this time. One is because David's not going out to fight any war at this point. This is actually towards the end of his life when things are stable. He fought many wars. He doesn't need to know his army because he's not going out to fight any war. It doesn't matter. And because of that, on the same token, he's sort of counting it as a way to, oh, look how great I am. Look, like to be more haughty and more prideful of his nation, and to look at it as, oh, look how big my nation is and how much things I have, and not necessarily to see it through God, which is very out of character to David. And we see also, by the way, another interesting thing to look at is the wars of Israel are always are never fought by numbers. They're always fought by connection to God. And we see throughout the Tanakh that the number of people does not affect winning or losing the war. It's all about their connection to God. So he does the census, and now God says, he regrets the census, and he says, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have done that. It's not a good thing. And then Gad HaNavi, another Navi at the time, Gad this time, Gimel Dalet, Gad, and he comes to David and he says, God's very angry, and you have a choice of 3 punishments that you're going to get because of what you did. And some of the commentators say that he should have gotten all 3, but because he repented, he only got he was able to choose one. Either way, he has to choose one of the punishments. One was 7 years of famine. 2 was 3 months of an enemy fighting with them and causing them problems. And 3rd was 3 days of David, which is like a plague. It's some sort of plague that would kill the people and the animals. David chooses the 3rd, chooses David, 3 days of David. He says, I want to be in God's hands with a magefa, which is interesting to think about what's going on now with Corona, and it is all gone, but another time. Anyway, so he chooses the David, and people start dying, and everything, that this magefa comes, this plague comes, and then David ends up, praying to God, as David does, and says, please, let's stop this. You want to punish me, don't punish the nation. And Gad HaNavi tells him, go give a mizbeach in the garden of Arav Nahar Yebusi, the threshing hold of Arav Nahar Yebusi, this non-Jew from the nation of Yebus. and go make a mizbeach, an altar there to God, and we'll stop this. So just interesting for those who are interested in these type of things. I thought it was cool. This is a goren. This is the threshing floor. It's a flat area, and they would take different tools and different animals, and they would be separating the wheat from the kernel, from the husk and the kernels. And by the way, just a side point, a lot of our malachot of Shabbat, the things we can't do on Shabbat, are based in these practices and different things they would do agriculturally. Okay, so now he goes to he goes to do this mizbeach in Aravna's goren. And the whole encounter there is very, very interesting and very reminiscent of the other place one of the other places that was bought in Tanakh, Marat HaChpelah, which we spoke about last week. And we see, I'm going to look at this chart, I'll put it for a second. I want to give a little background first. He goes to Aravna HaYevusi and he wants to buy the threshold, okay? And we'll see in this story, which I'll go through now, there are 4 similarities between this story and the Abraham buying Marat HaChpelah. And then there's 2, but I think really one main difference, which ties it all together of David's life. So look here, the top row, if you're looking, is David, the David story, and the bottom row is the Abraham story. So he goes, David goes to Aravna, and he says, what's his goal? Liknot mimcha et hagoren livnot mizbeach Hashem. So you have a Jew, a member of Israel, wanting to buy a piece of land from a non-Jew. Same thing with Abraham. Vayiten li et marat machpelah asher lo b'kser sadeo b'kesef melea yitnenu. I'll pay full price that I could have it. Okay, the 2 characters want to buy a piece of land. So then the second thing that we see is the person who's being asked responds by saying, "Oh, just take it. I don't want you to purchase it." Please take it. Do whatever you want. Make the mizbeach. That's fine. Take it. Yikach. And so too with Abraham. Lo adoni shama'ani hasadeh natati lach ve'amara shebo lecha. Right? I'll give it to you. You don't need to buy it. It's all good. Then third similarity, the buyer, Abraham and David, insist, I will buy this with money. I'm not taking this as a gift. Amar hamelech el Aravna, lo ki kano ekne meotcha b'mchiyad, right? I will not take it. I will buy it for you, buy it from you at price, right? And then the same thing with Abraham and Ephron. וידבר אל עפרון באוזני הארץ לאמור, אם אתה לנו שמענו נתתי כסף השדה, קח ממני. Here, I'm giving you the money for it, take it from me. And another similarity is we get the exact number, the exact price, the exact number of money that was exchanged. בכסף שקלים 50 with David, with 50 שקלים, and 400 shekel kesef with 400 shekel kesef with Abraham. So we see there's a lot of things going on here. Again, I'll just review. Someone wants to buy it. They say, no, don't buy it. They insist, and they buy it for a specific price. Now, the main difference, which I think makes all the difference, is who's bowing to who. We see, cover the first column for a second. Aravna bows to David. The non-Jew bows to the Jew. And Abraham, Vayikom Abraham, Vayishtachu la'ama aretz v'nechet. Abraham is doing the bowing to V'nechet. Now, why is it so significant? Because we see, also look back here in the first column here, David is coming into this whole scenario as king. Vayishkov Aravna, Vayishakef Aravna, Vayar et hamelech v'et avadav. He looks up. Imagine Aravna sitting there doing his field work, whatever it may be, and he looks and he sees Hamelech v'et avadav ovrim elav. The king and his servants. I am imagining this whole entourage. The king's not traveling alone, and he's like, "What's going on here?" And he says, "What's going on here?" Right? And the da is where he bows. So he sees him, he bows, and he says, "What's going on here?" And then we have the whole exchange. With Abraham, it's a very different exchange. Abraham gets up from essentially sitting Shiva from mourning Sarah. So he's distraught. He's still in a bad place, and he comes up to them. I'm a stranger among you, right? He comes from a very not secure place. David's coming as king. And I think that's the whole change of what's going on in David's life. And you see it even in the language. If you look here, David's language is very assertive. Yikach and kano ekne, I'm going to buy it, like not giving any, very assertive, strong language. And Abraham's language is much more not passive. What am I looking for? He's trying more to appease them and to be apologetic and, oh please, I'll give it to you. I'll take it from, very much more of a meeker language. And we see that basically through David's life as king, he established everything that Abraham was promised in Brit Ben Abetarim of getting a nation. And David wants to establish the final nail, the final what am I looking for? Just the final thing that to do is in building the Beit HaMikdash. And very interestingly enough, I don't want to go too much into this, but we see that again with the Yamim versus Shmuel, we don't know in Sefer Shmuel that this is the Har Moriah. We don't know that it's told that it's Gorer Nahebusi. It's in Yerushalayim somewhere. We don't know exactly where. Later in the Yamim, we are told this is where the Mikdash is going to be built. Okay, so we see the importance of that, and I think that the reason for that. By the way, before I go into what I think of that, just to know this land, this Yevusi land, was a very problematic land in this time. It was a problematic land for the people during the time of the Shoftim. There was Pilegesh Begivah in that area. Crazy story, and it was also a big problem when David tried to capture it. It wasn't easy. It was a very stressful area. What's the word? Militarily, and he gets it through this, buying it from Arabna, and we see here. I think I read a very nice thing from. He talks about the fact that why isn't it mentioned here, and it's only mentioned there, is to show the how did he phrase that? The double causality of choosing Jerusalem, and what did he mean by that? Which I think was a beautiful point. He says here we see that David chose Jerusalem because it made sense to him. It was, if you look at it, it's between Binyamin and Yehuda. It unites them. It was sort of a neutral zone. It unites them geographically, and it was helping end the rebellions and the problems of transitioning over from Shaul to David. And it seems that was the reason that he chose it. Or does it seem that we see later that God told him to choose it? And this is where the land that God chose to have his Mikdash be built, to have his temple be built. And I think that because it's not a clear answer which one came first and who chose who, it's showing the partnership that we need to build with God through the land, right? Not only in building up the land itself, but choosing where to establish. And also there's a very interesting thing is that the places itself aren't inherently holy. It's what we bring to it and we choose to establish on it. So, that this partnership is always the goal, and especially with the monarch, with the king. So I think it's just very important to see that last week I spoke about Abraham being Masev Watziman Lebanim, about Abraham being the prototype and us as his children following along. We see that also with David, who mirrors Abraham, but as the king. So he's not only mirroring it as people in the nation, he's mirroring it as the leader of the nation, and doing it a step above. He's getting a brit with God a step above, establishing a house for him, establishing a monarchy for the name of God. That the goal is to establish the name of God and to allow the people religious sovereignty in their land, right? And we see also how he buys the land. It's a totally different conversation, right? And I think it's so important to realize is that through David's life of instability, his whole goal is to establish that stability. And that's what he does, like through his son, essentially. There's a whole, I'm not going to go into it now, but just food for thought. I see that it's already getting a little bit late, but David actually also has to leave Eretz Yisrael and go live with the Plishtim, and his also things that he goes through there are very similar, not very similar, or similar and different to what Abraham went through, and we see also through David, how we have to deal with living under a foreign power, and how it's very complicated and not so simple. So let me just see if I forgot any points, and then I'll sum up. Yeah, so basically, to summarize, what I see is that we have to look at the king. We have to look at the king of a nation to understand his connection to the land, because the king has to be connected to the land. I call this the king without a castle, but it's almost a king without a land, because he has to establish all this and put in the work for his son Shemuel to establish it. And I think from what we can learn is that even if we don't know when we'll have full sovereignty as a nation in Israel, and we don't know when Mashiach is coming, and we don't know when we'll have the ability to be calm, even in this crazy life that we all live. The same way that we lived a life of instability and was always trying to grasp that stability and to connect that to God in any way he can. That's also what I think we need to be doing as members of the nation, is always finding ways that we could help build our communities, build our connection to the land, and uniting them and causing and allowing for unity and stability in whatever we can. So yeah, I think we'll end there. And I think also one more point, is that even in his moments of stability, David doesn't look at it as a personal gain. He looks at it as how he could connect to God. And the same way that Abraham is always spreading the name of God, so too that was David's goal, and that should be our goal as well, of not a personal thing, but a national and godly thing. So thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed. Next week, I'm not sure if I'm going to go into Yaakov or Yoshua. I'm not really sure who I'm going to choose, who we're going to go into, but if anyone has any suggestions, let me know. And hope to see you there. Thank you. Oh, Mia, you want to say hello? All right. Thank you. I should go run to him. Thanks for coming, everyone. Have a good night. Good day.
Hi, Jen.
Hi, Grandma. How are you?
Very nice class. I'm learning.
Good. Thanks for coming.
Don't understand too much of the Hebrew, but okay.
Well, I hope you're getting something, as long as you're getting something.
I'm here.
Love you.
You should have let Meir come in.
Yeah. Well,
thank you, Janice.
Hi, Grandma.
Hi, honey. Thank you. Very nice.
Thank you.
You're a great teacher.
Thanks, Grandma. Love you. See you guys. Bye.